side. So I've logged in and I'm immediately taken to my data, which is this first tab up here. So everything that I've ever uploaded onto Figshare, whether it's still in draft form, whether it's been published and I want to go back in and edit it, I can see it in my data. So there are a couple of different ways to upload files into Figshare. Just to preface it, that we do accept any file type into Figshare, and we preview over 1,200 files in the browser. So what I mean when I say preview, it'll probably be a good idea to start by showing you what an item looks like in Figshare in case you're unfamiliar with it. So what I mean when I say preview is that we create a visualization of the data at the top of the browser, which is really good for engagement, helps people to see what the data is before they download it, make sure that it's what they're looking for. And in the case of things like 3D files like this one, it adds another dimension of interactivity with it, because you can actually zoom in and out, you can rotate it 360 degrees. Yeah, so that's what a preview looks like in Figshare, with all of the metadata that we're going to fill in when we upload toward the bottom of the item page. So you can upload any file type into Figshare, and we preview over 1,200 in the browser. There are a couple of different ways that you can upload data. So one is just to drag and drop those files into the browser, or you can click create a new item and a form will come up that will allow you to add files and metadata. There are a couple of programmatic ways that you can upload data into Figshare as well. So one is to import from GitHub. So if any of your researchers have a GitHub account for software, they can sync their GitHub and their Figshare accounts to programmatically move software from GitHub and create a snapshot of it in Figshare. So that's just a matter of syncing those two accounts. There's also something called the desktop uploader. So if you go to figshare.com/tools, or if you just search for Figshare desktop uploader, then you'll be taken to the desktop uploader. So it works with most operating systems, but it is an application that you download, which allows you to upload multiple files at once or really large files. So the capacity for a browser tends to be about 5 gigabytes. Anything more than that and it might crash the browser, or you just might not have a stable enough internet connection to allow for it. So that's where the desktop uploader comes in handy. So it has resumable uploads, so you can upload large files or multiple files into it, and if you lose your internet connection, it will just pick up where it left off once you're connected again. So that's one way of programmatically uploading data. And the other is via our API. So if you have anyone who is programmatically savvy and knows what they're doing with APIs, and they have data that live elsewhere, and they want to, rather than have to download it and re-upload it into Figshare, if they know how to use the API to move the data from where it is now into Figshare, then they can do that. So this is all available at docs.figshare.com. But again, if you just search for API Figshare, you will find it. So for the purpose of our demo today, I'm just going to create a new item and upload it manually. Oh, God. Sorry. If anyone's just joined us, if you wouldn't mind muting, that would be really helpful for any background noise. Sorry, there's just a bit of background noise. Would you mind muting? Okay, so I'm just going to create a new item manually. So I click create a new item and it pops a metadata form and it prompts me to either browse my computer for files or to drag and drop files into the browser. So you could have an item that has just one file, or you can have an item that has multiple files. So if I click Browse, and choose the files that I want to upload into this item, and while those are uploading, I can start filling in some of the metadata. So some of these fields have green dots next to them, and these fields are required to be filled in order to publish an item. And that's because the organization that mints our DOIs requires these fields to be filled in before they'll allow us to mint DOIs. So the first field here is title. So as soon as I click onto a field, there's some tooltip information on the right side of the screen, and this changes depending on which field I'm in. So it gives a bit more information about what type of information I should be filling in, some helpful tips. Like for this particular field, it mentions that including a really thorough title will help your items be discoverable via search engines such as Google. So if anyone is ever unsure what should be included in a particular field, the tips here on the right are really helpful. Okay. Right, the next field here is authors. So I'm logged in as Figshare admin UKZN, so I automatically appear as an author in this field. I can remove myself as an author if I want to by clicking the X to the right of my name. And now I'll no longer be listed as an author, but this item will still live in my data. So if I want to add co-authors, I can just start searching the database. It does give preference to your university. So if there are people from other universities, they will appear later, but if you're looking for someone within UKZN, they should appear first. So if I found the person that I want to add, I can just click on their name and it puts this blue-green box around their name. If I want to add someone who has multiple accounts, or it's a very common name and I want to ensure that I'm getting the right account, I could enter their email address associated to their Figshare account and it would pull that up. Or if I know what their ORCID ID is and they've synced their ORCID ID to their Figshare account, I can put their ORCID ID in here and it will populate their profile page. If I want to add someone who doesn't have a Figshare account, so I think I've done myself before, that's fine. So I have a couple of inactive accounts, but if I wanted to add myself as an author and I didn't want to use any of these accounts, if I click Add Author Details, it will prompt me for a first name, a last name, an email address, and an ORCID. Last name is the only one of these fields that has to be filled in. The rest are optional. But if I filled in everything and I'm happy with it, I click Save Details, and it puts a gray box around that author's name. So the difference between the two is that when I go to publish this item, I can click on this particular author's name, and it will take me to their profile page on Figshare. Because I don't have a profile page on Figshare, I've just manually added my author details in for this particular author. It won't hyperlink to their Figshare profile page because they don't have one. I can also reorder the name in which the authors appear. So if I wanted Megan to be first, if I drag and drop it to the front, Megan is now listed as the first author. The next field here is categories. So we use the Australian Fields of Research schema, but you can customize this at your university if there's a particular category schema you want to use. There's a couple of different ways of finding categories. One is just to search at the top here, or you can browse this top tier and have a look at the subcategories that exist within them. But if I type in a keyword, it will find all of the categories with marketing in the title, and I can select as many as I want. These are discoverable once you've published this item. So if I choose marketing theory, if I click on marketing theory on the public item, it will show me all of the Figshare items with marketing theory listed as the category. So this is really good for discoverability. If someone elsewhere is searching for all of the marketing theory categories, they will stumble across UKZN's research with that particular category. If you're looking for a category that isn't listed here, I'd recommend finding the next closest thing. And you can use the keywords field. This is free text, so you can use it to get as specific as you want. And I'll cover that in just a second. This field here, group, this is an optional field that the university can choose to implement if they'd like to. And this allows the user to choose the group within the university that this particular piece of data should live in. So this is particularly useful if you have researchers that work across multiple departments to allow them to choose which particular department this specific research applies to. So this might not appear when you implement, but just to let you know that it is an available field. Item type. So this is the type of item that you're uploading. There is an information sort of icon to the right of each of these fields that lets you see a bit more information about what each one is. So fairly straightforward. Can I just remind people to please mute themselves because we're just having a bit of background noise. Thank you. So keywords, this is the free text field. So you can start typing a keyword and it will search the Figshare database for other keywords that have been added, just to give you some ideas, but you don't have to choose from those. So if you wanted to include marketing as a keyword, you type in marketing and then you hit enter. It puts that same green blue box around it, which means that it's now been added as a keyword. These are also searchable once you publish an item. So you can click on the marketing keyword and it'll show you all of the Figshare items with marketing as the keyword. So you just have to have at least one keyword in order to publish, but you can add as many as you like by typing them in and hitting enter after each one. The next field is description. So this includes things like abstracts, methodologies, reproducibility, any guidance on how to reproduce the data, anything like that. It does support HTML, so if you want to copy and paste that from another source, you can, but you have to have just at least 4 characters in this particular field in order for it to be valid. So it's not very descriptive, but for the purposes of the demo, it'll be all right. This next field is funding, and that's an optional field, so it doesn't have this green dot next to it. But if there is funding information associated to this particular piece of data, I'd always recommend including it just to be as thorough as possible. But for this particular field, we have an integration with Dimensions, which is one of our sister companies at Digital Science, which is a grant database. So you could include a particular grant that is found within Dimensions. So all of these have been pulled from Dimensions. So if you click on one of these, when you go to publish the item, this will be hyperlinked to the Dimensions page for that particular grant. So it'll give you a bit more information, just links the two together. But you don't have to choose from that database. So if, for example, the university is the funder, you could include the whole university name, but you could just include the free text, and then as soon as you click out of it, it doesn't allow you to add to it. So then UKZN would just be a plain text entry for this particular field. And you can add as many grants as are associated to this data set. References. So what most people use the references field for is to reference the publication in which this data set can be found. But you could include any valid URL in this field, and that's fine. So you could include a reference to another data set or anything as long as it's a valid URL. This next field here is the license. So this describes how others will be able to reuse the data. So the university will have implemented a certain set of licenses. So they might be some more Creative Commons licenses. The rest of these are all software licenses. But there's a hyperlink here which says, what's this? So if anyone is unsure as to what license to assign, they can click on that and have a look on our knowledge portal, which is just a knowledge base for frequently asked questions, user guides, things like that, which gives a breakdown of all of the Creative Commons licenses and those software licenses. Tells you a bit more about what you can and cannot do with them, and then links to the Creative Commons website for more information. And then this particular field is what we call a custom metadata field. So it doesn't come as standard across all of Figshare. This will be something that has been implemented by an administrator at the university. And you can have custom metadata fields that sit across the entire university and ones that sit within specific departments. So those might be subject-specific metadata fields. So this is a metadata field whereby I can select multiple fields. There are ones where you can only select one. There are date selectors and email fields. There's all sorts, but that's more the administration side. So those are all of the fields that exist. There are a couple of different conditions that you can place on data as well. It's not always appropriate for it to be openly available. So one of those conditions is an embargo. So you can set an embargo on just the files. So the metadata is publicly available, but the files are under an embargo. Or you can set an embargo on both the files and the metadata. So nothing is publicly available until the embargo is lifted. So you could choose either one of those. You can select a time period for the embargo. So you can either select from static dates here, or there's a date selector here for you to find a specific date. And then you can include an optional reason why this piece of data is under an embargo. The embargo does become automatically lifted when the date that's been selected arrives, but a user can always come back in and extend the date and change how long the embargo should last. So if you set an embargo on the whole item, so the files and the metadata, nothing's publicly available until the embargo is lifted. But if you do set an embargo on just the files, I'll show you what that looks like. So it says that the files are under an embargo, and it has a countdown as to when they'll be available and includes a reason why. But all of the metadata is publicly available. So while this item is under embargo for another 2 years and 9 months, people can still access the metadata. They can still see that this research has been done. So as you can see, lots of people have seen it, almost 700 views. But the files are under an embargo. I'm just going to address a question that someone's raised about the description field having a text limit. It does have a text limit, and I want to say it's 1,000 characters, but I'm going to make a note of that and confirm that that is the case. I'm also fairly certain that that can be lifted on a case-by-case basis, but there are also you can also set more custom metadata fields if you want to allow for more information to be displayed. So if, for example, you have a description and someone wants to include some information about how to reproduce the data in the description, but it doesn't fit within the field, you could create a custom metadata field that is specifically for reproducibility, so they can include the reproducibility bit of the description in there. But I will double check on that limit for you. Sorry, I'm just going to make a note. Right, so that's embargoes. The other thing that you can do is make files confidential. So if you want to upload the files into the repository but not make them publicly available, but you may want to make the metadata publicly available, you could upload the files, fill in all of the metadata, and choose to make the files confidential. You can include a reason here if you'd like as well. And then when you go to publish a confidential item, it says files not publicly available. This was the reason given by Monash University in this example. And they've actually included an email address to contact them if you think you should have access. So that's an option as well. There's two other things down here that I want to show you as well. One is to generate a private link. So if you'd like to share this item with someone else before you publish it, maybe it's a co-author, you want to have them have a look at it before it's published, you can generate a private link. So if I go to save these changes and I click on this private link, it will show me the files I've uploaded and the metadata I've selected so far, but it is a private item, so it says this item is shared privately. So whoever has access to the private link can still, they can still download the files, they can have a look at them, but it isn't discoverable publicly. You have to have the URL for the private item to access it. If you want to disable access to the private link, so maybe the co-authors have had a look at it, they've provided feedback, and now you want to eliminate them from having access to the private link. If you hover over the X and click disable, it will prompt you, do you want to disable this link? Yes, disable. And now anyone who has access to that private link won't resolve to the private link. It's a broken URL. The last thing here is to reserve a DOI. So the most popular use case for this is to include the data citation in a publication. So if a researcher is submitting an article to a journal and they want to store the data that's associated to the publication within your institutional repository and keep it separate, they can come in, create an item, a drafted item, click Reserve DOI, and they can share this DOI with the publisher to say anywhere that you cite the data associated to this publication, use this DOI. So it won't resolve until the author comes in and publishes the item, but it allows the user to have that citation work when the journal article is published. So they could share this DOI with the publisher. Once the article is published, they can come back in and publish the item, and this DOI that they reserved will resolve to the public item. There's two other conditions that I want to show you on the data, and in order to do that, I have to remove the files because they only work if there's no files associated to the item, it's just metadata. So if I go to manage my files, click on manage at the top right here, and I delete these files from this item, I click done editing, I go back, there are two additional options that appear here. One is for a metadata record only. So if there's no files associated to this particular record, it's just metadata, I can have a metadata record only, and I can include an optional reason why here. If I go to publish a metadata record, it looks a lot like a confidential item. It just says files not publicly available, but all of the metadata is publicly available. And then the other one up here is a linked file. So if the files live elsewhere, maybe in a fit for purpose repository, doesn't make sense to move them across, but you'd like a record of them in Figshare, maybe you want a DOI, whereas where they live now, they don't have a DOI. You could include a linked file and just include a hyperlink, a URL to where the files live here. And then when you go to publish it, it just says files stored somewhere else, and you can click on this link and it will take you to where the data lives. But it still has all of the metadata associated to the item below. So those are the conditions that you can place on the data. There's a couple of other things I want to show you before I move on to projects and collections, which are ways of grouping data together, essentially. One is that you can preview the item, so you can have a look at what it will look like before it's published. You can also edit the timeline. So if you want to edit the publication date, if it's something that was published elsewhere, and it was a publication date in the past, you can go back and edit the timeline. And you can also have a look at any files that were deleted. So those 2 files that I uploaded at the beginning, from the point at which I remove them from the item, I have 30 days to restore them if I want to. So if I click on deleted files, it shows me the files that I am able to restore. And if I click on the arrow to the right of each item, it restores them back to my item. So once I'm happy with it, in order to publish, I tick the publish box. If I don't do that, it remains as a drafted item until I'm ready to publish. This particular environment has review turned on. So before an item becomes publicly available, it goes to a reviewer to approve or reject before it goes live. So as an end user, I'm notified of this, and it tells me that it's going to be reviewed by one of these people. If I'm happy with that, I click Publish Item, and it reminds me about the persistency of publishing a DOI and the terms, which can be set by the university, and then the license that I've assigned, just as a reminder. So if I tick Yes, Publish, then it lets me know that it's been submitted for review, and I'll be notified whether it's been approved or rejected by a reviewer. So that's the process of uploading files into Figshare. There are a couple of other tabs I want to show you with the last 15 minutes or so that remain. One is projects. So projects are used for collaborative, ongoing work, and it can be solely within the university, or you can invite people outside the university to be a part of your project. Projects are initially private, and you can choose to make them publicly available if you want to. Not all items within the project have to be publicly available. You can have a couple of items which are public and a couple of items which are private. Private items are only accessible to members of the project. So if you are a member of any projects, you will see them here, whether you collaborate on them or whether you own the project, so you've created the project. So if I click on Create a New Project, it will ask me for a bit of information. So what is the title of the project? That's required. An optional description, so works the same way as creating an item on Figshare. Funding, that also works the same way as creating an item on Figshare. And then project type. So there are 2 different types of projects. One is an individual project and one is a group project. So for individual projects, everyone uses their own quota and account storage. So that comes from quota that's been assigned to the individual user. People take their work with them if they leave the project. So if you invite people from other universities or within the university even, and they leave the project, either you remove them or they leave, then they take any items that they've uploaded into the project with them when they go. And items are created using the metadata schema of the submitter. So when you go to create an item in the project, if they're from another university that uses Figshare and they have custom metadata fields, those will appear for those individual users only, whereas anyone from UKZN, when they go to upload items into the project, your university metadata schema will appear for them. Group projects work in pretty much the exact opposite way. So submitter's quota won't be used. Storage allocation comes directly from the project. So when you have implemented Figshare, you've assigned a certain amount of storage allocation for group projects. So it comes from there rather than the individual storage allocation. So you can select which group this project should live in, and by default, which storage allocation it should come from. All work is stored on institutional storage and remains within the project if people leave. So if you invite people to the project and you kick them out or they leave, anything they've uploaded into the project stays even when they leave. And contributors must adopt the metadata schema of the project owner. So if you invite people from outside the university to upload items into the project, they will have to adopt the UKZN metadata schema in order to upload items into the project. So that's the difference between the 2. There's no right way or wrong way to use it. It just depends on how you want to use the project as to which one you choose. And then if I scroll back up to the top, on the right side, I can see who the members of the project are. So I'm the owner, I've created the project, but I can add people to upload items into the project. Those are collaborators. And I can also add people just to view items in the project. So they can't upload or leave comments, but they can see everything in the project. So it works the exact same way as adding authors. So I can either search by their name, their email address, or their ORCID ID if they've synced their ORCID to their Figshare account. So I'll search and I'll find the user that I want to add. I can either make them a collaborator, so they can upload items into the project and leave comments, or just a viewer, so they can just see the things in the project. And I can add an optional message explaining what the project is for if I want to, and then click Add Members. So once I save this project, it will send anyone I've added as a member of the project an email, inviting them to join the project and inviting them to upload items if I've made them collaborators. If I want to add people who don't have a Figshare account, or maybe they're from a different university and don't know if they have a Figshare account or not, I can select Invite New Users, and I can include their name, their email address, whether I want them to be a viewer or a collaborator, and an optional message. And it will send them an email invitation to create a free Figshare.com account, so they won't have an account within UKZN. And once they've created that Figshare account, to join my project. There's a question about populating. So as you're populating metadata, does Figshare automatically save your work, or do you have to actively save the work? So you do have to hit save in order to save it. But if you exit out of the item before you've hit save, it does prompt you to save. So it won't be deleted automatically. It does prompt you to save it. But yeah, hopefully that answers your question. So if I go back to, I won't save that because that's just a fake project, but if I go back to my projects, if I had any projects here, I could click on it and it would prompt me to create items within the project, leave comments within the project, but I can also move items within my data to projects, so I don't have to necessarily re-upload items into the project. So if I click on the ones I want to add, I can't add that one because it's in review, but if I add this item, for example, and I click on Actions, Move to and From Project, I'd be able to select the project here I wanted to move, and it would move it into the project. So that's projects. I'll show you an example of a published project, just so you can see what it looks like. So this is a project that has two members here. So Luke is the owner of the project, and Louise has been added to the project as a member. And you can see all of the metadata that has been filled in. All of this is custom metadata. So this particular institution has a lot of custom metadata fields for their projects. But if you scroll down to the bottom, you can see that there are 4 public items in this project. And these essentially for this institution act as marketing, essentially. So it just publicly shows what they're doing for this particular project. But they might have another 15, 20 items in the project which are private, which are only accessible to members of the project. So those won't appear publicly. It's just the items that have been published, which will appear publicly. So that's projects. The next tab up here is collections. So collections are ways of grouping data together. So before I show you how to create a collection, I'm going to show you what one looks like publicly, which will help explain what they are and what the difference is between a collection and a project. So in a collection, everything that you add to the collection is publicly available data. There's nothing private in a collection. It's all been published. You can add items to a collection that you yourself have uploaded as an end user, and you can also add items to a collection that other people have uploaded as well. One of the major differences between collections and projects is that collections themselves get DOIs. So this DOI here is the DOI for the collection as a whole. Each individual item within the collection has its own DOI, but the collection as a whole has a DOI. So you could share this with whomever, and they would be able to see all of the items within the collection. So because collections themselves get DOIs, we require a lot more metadata for collections than we do for projects. So it's all of the same metadata fields that exist for creating items will exist for creating collections as well. So I can see all the authors, all the categories and the keywords that have been associated to this particular collection. And if I scroll down, I can see all of the individual items that have been added to this collection. So I can click on the item and I can see the item page as well. So if I click create a new collection, because collections get DOIs, all of the required fields here have the same green dots next to them, need to be filled in order to create a collection. This collection. I think if I save it, it will let me edit it, but it won't let me publish it until I go back in and fill in those required fields. But just to show you what it looks like once you've created a collection. This hasn't been published yet, it's still in draft form. And I can either add public items, so items across all of Figshare or within UKZN, or I can add from my data to the collection. So if I click add public items, it gives preference to UKZN here, or I can switch back to my data if I want to. But I can also, when I'm searching, choose to include content from across all of Figshare in my search results if I want to. So if I find what I want to add, and I click on it again to deselect it, and click add selected items. Now if I go back to my collection, I can see those two items that I found I have now added to my collection. So if I need to make any changes to the collection, to the metadata, if I want to publish my collection, there's a cogwheel at the top right here called Manage, and it lets me preview the collection, edit the collection details, edit that metadata. I can generate a private link in the same way I generate a private link for an item. I can remove items, and I can delete the collection. So it's reminding me that if I want to publish this collection, I need to fill in those mandatory metadata fields in order to do so. So I don't have the option to publish it yet, but if I go back in and edit the collection details, add that mandatory metadata, and go back, it will allow me to publish the collection. The last tab up here is activity, and this is really only used for two pieces of information. One is if you're ever invited to join another person's project, you will get an invitation in your activity tab, which will allow you to accept or reject the invitation to join the project. And the other thing that you'll see here is if you've requested more storage allocation, whether that's been approved or rejected, you'll be notified of that in your activity tab. So to request more storage allocation, if you go back to my data, you'll see up here in the top sort of middle right, how much storage allocation you've been allocated, which is 2 gigabytes, and how much of it you've used, which is 1.81 megabytes. So if you want to request more, you click request more storage. It'll ask you how much storage you want to request and an optional reason why. So it's always good to include, to give a bit of context as to why you're asking for more storage, and then click submit. And that will go to an administrator to approve or reject, or they can even amend the storage amount. So if you've asked for if you've asked for 4 gigabytes and an administrator isn't willing to give you 4, but they'll give you 3, they can amend it to 3 and then approve the request, and you'll have 3 gigabytes. So we have a couple of minutes remaining. If anyone has any questions, feel free to either unmute or pop them in the chat box. While you do that, I'll show you a couple of other things under the profile page. So if you click on the drop-down menu, and click on Profile. This is where you can sync your ORCID if you have one. You can amend any personal details or professional details. You can sync your social media accounts. So when you publish an item, you could choose to share that item directly on any social media accounts if you've synced them here. This is where you can update biographical information and add publications. So that's all available. Change your profile picture. All of that is available under My Profile. There's also a place to change settings and applications. If you're using, if you are syncing your GitHub account, this is where you would connect your GitHub account. And if you're using the API, you need something called a personal token in order to authenticate the API. So this is where you can create a personal token and start using the API. I think that's everything I wanted to cover.